only occasionally go to London. So it's kind of one of those good things that you now get the diversity of all of us from all around the country can come meet and chat. Delighted to be joined by Gilbert Lennox-King from HB Reavis. His specialism is property technology, which I kind of think I could have an entire discussion around, but we won't. We'll save that for another one. And then Matt Hyam, Chief Digital Officer at Microsoft. So do you want to say hello, guys, and actually do a quick intro to sort of what your day jobs kind of look like at the minute? Matthew.
Yeah, sure. Hi. So as Rachel said, I'm the Chief Digital Officer for Microsoft UK and also the Sustainability Lead as well. My job so far during this COVID period has been manic. It's fundamentally shifted. I feel the pain, the pleasure, and all of the benefits and some of the issues that have been going on, but obviously none for those individuals that have been put out of work during this process. So I feel very lucky in that space.
Cool, thank you. Gilbert?
So my name's Gilbert Lennox-King from Symbiosi by HB Reavis. Symbiosi is a business unit within HB Reavis. HB Reavis is a...
Did we lose Gilbert? Or is that me?
I think we might have lost Gilbert.
Modern technology wouldn't happen
Modern
in real life.
technology, future of work.
It would not happen in real life. Sorry, I think we lost you there for a bit, Gilbert. Oh dear, Matthew, it looks like it's just you and me. Going to be waxing lyrical about the whiskey in the corner.
No problem.
That's okay. We'll see if he pops back in. Sorry, keep going. Yeah, so I think you touched on it there, Matthew, that the future of work is wildly changing, you know, for everyone. Like us that are fortunate enough to still have jobs probably feel like we have 3 jobs now, which is generally how I feel, or it's radically changed. But, you know, if you think about the recent past, for the last couple of years, we've all waxed lyrical in our big companies and whatever it is about the future of work and AI taking jobs and it's here and what do we do. But if you consider the current climate with COVID, the economy, redundancies, more redundancies coming, we're probably at a stage where there's many people thinking, do I have work in the future? You know, like it's not about the future of my work. Do I have work? Which is a much more fundamental question. So for you, do you think this has really changed the narrative of future work? Before it was very much more AI's coming to take your job, scaremongering, as in repositioning. Now it's like, do I have work? Like what's your take on that kind of narrative change that we've seen in the last 6 months?
Yeah, well, I kind of always believed that we should be taking the use of technology like AI as a methodology to ask better questions, as opposed to seeing it as a way of diluting the capabilities of humans. I think it's about releasing the capabilities of humans into more meaningful work, and that's the purpose of it. I think a lot of organizations were still looking at it as a way to drive operational efficiency and maybe lose FTEs, but some of the more purposeful organizations that have some morals and realize that people are ultimately the foundation of every business, do realize that actually it's about competing in a much better, different economy. COVID has flipped that, I must admit, completely flipped it on its head. We've definitely seen that. The dependency on technology is absolutely gone exponential to 800%, even from our stack perspective, from our organization, which puts huge amounts of pressure on technology organizations, but huge amounts of pressure on that people factor as well. So is there a replacement? I don't think that technology should be seen as that replacement still. I think there are organizations that are trying their best to maintain their people, and obviously with government fundings like furlough, etc., is to try and maintain that. But we do need to think differently in the long term. That was all a short-term outcome that happened for what they thought was going to be 3 or 4 months. Now we're looking at potentially 18 months, 2 years as to how we help people get back to that. The shift, I don't think anyone's got the ultimate answer, but it's definitely changed people's minds with the fact of where are my skills, what are transferable, what's the economy going to look like in 6 to 8 months' time. what's my career feel like? I mean, sometimes I think there was a natural move from like a job for life. We were definitely moving away from that, and the book, The Squiggly Career, kind of helps define that. But I think people are waking up to the fact they do need to think about reskilling and using the time that they've got now to do that rapidly. But when a market is going to have 9 million, potentially 9 million people unemployed by the end of October, November this year, that's a difficult market to be playing in, and a really difficult market to be reskilling in.
Yeah, and I think that's it. And I'm with you. I had the sort of benefit of being around the future of work, the positive impact of it, and that a lot of the companies I've worked with or for in the last few years were very much around keeping headcount, but actually freeing us to be brilliant at what we do in the human things, and actually making us enjoy our jobs more. And even those companies that have that great intention are now under pressure, so they can't do the grand plans. And I think that's kind of the struggle that we're having, and we're all sort of in the sort of the same boat. And I think that's the struggle that we're going to have going forward, is you have these highly skilled people, and what we were planning for the future of work, of maybe automating the repetitive tasks, we weren't expecting industries that we thought were safe are no longer safe. So travel, tourism, pilots, you train for a long time, you spend a lot of money. Is it the case that the unemployed is looking, very much more professional middle class? It's kind of going up in that kind of thing, that people that you wouldn't see, and that's that you've spent a lot of time and money. So how do we address that? Like, I think this is something on all of us, not just employers, as humans. How do we address that balance? Like, if you're sitting and you've trained for a long time and now you're unemployed, like, what do we do?
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. It's that sudden wake up call of, I mean, we're always going to have a level of unemployment in society. I mean, that's just a given. And unfortunately, with the class system and availability of education, I think the bigger thing is freeing that post-school education up to be less monetized and more accessible and democratized to the individuals, so that they can retrain. Seeing people, like you say, pilots who spend hundreds of thousands of pounds in investment in their careers to do that very specialist kind of expertise, and thank God for them, because I've been on a number of flights and they've all been landed safely. But for them to be completely out of work overnight is barbaric in a way. Nothing more can be said from that. But I think the only way, I think a lot of those individuals have a drive to continue to contribute to society, to themselves, to their own career. They've taken this time, a lot of them are, to your point, shifting themselves off to become, I think we discussed it earlier, Tesco drivers and becoming useful during the pandemic period. And if not, then they're reevaluating their lives and their skill sets. And that kind of individual always will. But what we need to do is somehow enable them and empower them so that they can financially support their own families, but at the same time reskill if they want to or if they need to, by democratizing that education level.
Yeah, and I think that the thing that's hit me is that we often talk about reskill, but I often think there's so many jobs that have amazing skills. It's not reskilling, it's just repointing. It's almost like, I think that if we were to consider a technology or a solutioning kind of thing, that if I could say, Matthew, this is you, the job doesn't exist anymore, but actually, did you know, that kind of thing. That we used to do those terrible things at school, but they weren't very insightful. So if we could update that would be useful. But I think it's kind of knowing what's available. And I think in our world, there's so many jobs that people don't realize that their skills are useful for, and that kind of human connection and trying to open that world up. But at the same time, there is going to be this mass unemployment that there's not going to be enough jobs for everyone. It's kind of matching that as well.
And I think that onus lands on us in corporate world. I mean, I obviously heavily get involved in recruitment for Microsoft in the UK across a number of different roles. And what we've tried to do to try and leverage diversity in those roles is to change the language within those role descriptions, largely to be more gender neutral and make it more acceptable for females to kind of apply for those roles. But I think we need to your point, is a lot of role descriptions look at very specific requirements on, you need to have a degree in X computer science or something along those lines. Actually, fact, to your point, there's thousands of transferable skills that we could leverage in many different, and we can teach that stuff in the long term. So putting a support structure in, showing people that there are transferable options, and looking at different ways of leveraging their capability.
So that comes to my next question. For someone who spent a ridiculous amount of time at university, are universities becoming redundant? Like in the fact that, honestly, having spent 10 years at uni and working there, if I was 18 now, probably wouldn't go. Definitely wouldn't want to go in a pandemic, judging by what we see in the news.
Yeah.
But I kind of like, I would want to work. I would want to get involved in study. I want to learn skills and, you know, apprenticeships and all that kind of things. You know, are we at the point where people are going to be demanding refunds for the university degrees, which don't really serve them well in the world? You know, what's the thought of the education system?
I think obviously the universities are doing a great job at kind of looking at blended learning, but what they're not doing is changing the commercial side of that. So they're still trying to charge obviously the 9,000 full amount for that, and obviously halls, even when they're doing a blended learning, to going into halls, paying for halls whilst they're doing everything virtually, it doesn't seem to stack. And that's my whole point about the commerciality and the monetization of education from end of school onwards, through a degree cycle, master's, PhD, and into further education throughout your career. I think we need to rethink what that model looks like, and what the value exchange there is. I think the wonderful thing about virtual blended learning is it now gives us the capability to allow more people to be able to access it. But for some reason, the commercial model off the back end is still the same as the old operating model, not the new. So something needs to definitely change there, not just react with regards to the pandemic. I think a lot of the millennials and the younger cohort that I've been talking to recently are actually seeing higher education as an opportunity to do something during COVID, because they're really worried about getting a job during the next 2 or 3 years. So might as well go to university and do something, right?
Exactly. Welcome back, Gilbert. And the modern technology, I think you just highlighted why we probably shouldn't solely rely on technology in our future going forward. But yeah, I suppose you kind of hopefully caught some of that chat there. Do you have any of the kind of thing, is it changing for you, considering that, you know, within the position of HB Reavis, you know, what's your thoughts around that? We're all migrated back to our regions, you know, and working from home and that kind of thing. How's that narrative changed for you?
Definitely. I think so HB Reavis, I think I got cut off there, but HB Reavis is a large speculative office developer. So we basically develop big office blocks on spec that we'll be able to fill them up. Obviously it's a challenging time for HB Reavis right now. But Symbiosis within HB Reavis is a technology business unit that's been going for a couple of years, trying to get basically focus on the working day within the office and what people get out of it. And I think on a more like day-to-day basis, what we're seeing is if people are going into the office now, obviously not right now, but when they start to go back to the office, I think that there'll be a lot more intentionality around what that trip looks like and why they're going in. I think that you know the old model of just going in every single day is being just turned on its head, and I think it'll be quite hard to go back to that. I'm not sure it ever will, to be honest. And then workspaces need to try and adapt and change, because people are, you know, they have a choice of whether they'll go into the office now. So yeah.
Do you think that one of the great things, and I kind of love it because I'm a big support local for Northern Irish fans out there, that Northern Ireland's great, but supporting that kind of regional development, what I've noticed is that, you know, my peers from my previous life would have been on planes to London and in the London office. Now we're now more regionally based, but our mini economy that's happening here, you know, resurgence in that, do you see there's a shift away from the big towns and cities to people spending a bit more time in the regions and therefore developing hubs and centres there rather than everybody head to the London or whatever it may be? What's the thoughts around that? Will that affect them properties and office space?
I think the short answer is nobody really knows how it's all going to play out. And there's a lot of talk about hub and spoke models, whether that'll become the new future. I think, I mean, some of the stuff that Microsoft have been doing around Microsoft Analytics and looking at the people that you interact with a lot. What we've been doing within Symbiosis previous to pandemic is looking at how people are actually using the space. So looking at how departments are actually interacting within the office space. And I think that what we've seen is that the siloing of different departments. So if I'm like in the sales department and I deal with the leasing guys, we talk a lot more during the pandemic, but maybe not different parts of the company. So like product design or construction, we just wouldn't ever interact with those people during COVID. So, but Whereas back in normal times, when everyone's going into the office, we would see a lot of that kind of colliding within the office environment. So how do you replicate that, those bumping into people moments in a digital sphere, I think is one of the big challenges and opportunities that a lot of people are looking at the moment and trying to figure out what the model is. I mean, hub and spoke could work if everyone in the same team lived in the same area, but it doesn't seem to work like that in a lot of the time in real life.
No, I get that. I'm probably there's some good questions coming in here, and I just saw one pop in there that I think before we move on from the office bit, but it's our offices likely to be repurposed, and the question was more around as data centers to support remote working. I've been on a few workshops and various things around what can we do with offices that maybe are empty now in the future if we are remote working. Do you see that kind of repurposing of commercial space or anything like that in the future?
Definitely. So we're trying to react to that with our ready to work space that we're doing at the moment in one of our projects, which is going live in March at Bloom, and that's making the office space very flexible to try and make it changeable for the future. So for example, if we see that there's a requirement for more meeting rooms, we can basically reconfigure the workspace so that there's more meeting rooms or more breakout spaces or common areas, or even, there's some talk about repurposing parts of the office for potential podcast recording facilities, those sorts of things.
Yeah, the kind of the thing that we did, we had a remote team before, and we actually made ourselves remote first long before COVID, so that you consider the experience as good for the people who are remote as are in the office. So people who get in the office, I think we need to switch our mind from that. I see a couple of questions coming in the question panel here from Christy, that kind of the idea around job for life, we still can't shape it. My parents are still in that era, by the way. They're still waiting till I grow up and get a real job, something like a lawyer, I'd imagine, or an actual doctor. But the fact is that the comment here was, is there a sort of a north-south shift in Europe, that where the northern region seem to be more focused on upskilling or and that kind of idea more than anything else? What are your focuses? I know we had a chat backstage where I'm looking to buy my Swedish house, and I kind of like the way of life was around Sweden, and that includes working too. But any thoughts on that about the job for life theory?
Yeah, well, you're probably talking to the wrong person on that one, because I've probably had the most transient career I can think of, and people trying to explain how I got to where I am or where I've come from or whatever, it's really difficult. It's like a very squiggly story. But I think it's a generational thing. I think you're right, and it definitely all the work I do with early in career is all about outcome. So it's about what are the projects they're working on, what skills can they develop around that, what's the outcome they're trying to deliver, and then they'll move on to the next thing and then move on to the next thing. And if I think about the way that we move around within our own organisation, is exactly the same thing. When I look at customers though in specific areas, and I don't know if COVID's going to amplify that or take it away, is if you've got a job for life and it's static and it's stable right now, I think everybody's kind of grabbing onto that and holding on to for dear life, and might even think, well, if there's future pertinent things, I'm just going to do what I do because it's kind of pandemic proof. But the other half of the individuals that have been affected may flick very much to the other one, so it's much more of a transient career perspective. And it goes back to some of the transferable skills and some other questions popping in around what are the best transferable skills is really, I think people are going to be starting to center in on what their skills are, what their transferable skills are, what are their strengths rather than their weaknesses. I think we often measure people in that side, and then hopefully we can be all a bit more open and more fluid in accepting that.
Yeah, and I think that nods to the kind of the 4 C's, the creativity, communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and that's where education is maybe heading. So is this a blend of education, employers, us as people? Reavis did a bit of research, and the blocker to getting away from the one job for life was actually parents. Parents were the ones pushing the narrative, if you need to be a doctor, be a lawyer, like the same way mine would be trying to look out for me, and not realizing that actually having the squiggly career, which I've also had, is actually probably more fun, interesting, and probably you might get to a more interesting point at the end. It might not look it while you're doing it, and I think that's the kind of thing of maybe where we need to be heading. I think I would take from that it's okay to have a squiggly career.
Yeah, but I think so. I mean, if I look back to kind of the credit crisis in 2008 and everything crashed, one of the first things that disappeared was in-job training, certainly for people who were mid-career. When you get to kind of the senior level, there's loads of leadership courses and random stuff they send you on. But in that middle part of your career, you've got your early schooling into education, higher education, and then to mid part of your career. There isn't anything there, and the investment towards that to underpin your career and advancement in various different skills kind of disappeared. Hopefully, and hopefully we're all seeing that realization that we do need to support our people at every stage of their career and apply that, because there is definitely that feeling of the middle era. When you're in that mid part of your career, you're kind of 30s to 40s, you're not knowing where to go, what the next step is, all that advancement. We've all got to shift into this continuous learning, continuous education, maybe even, as we're finding out, continuous pivot.
Well, I think that's where the Nordics do it well, where university's kind of free and you're encouraged to go to uni in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s and always do courses. And I think moving towards that probably would help people in that kind of career. Again, sort of picking up on a couple of questions here. And I think Tom said it kind of well. It is the repurposing rather than reskilling. I think we touched on that already. But I kind of, Tracy, and I want to tease out a bit more that sort of does remote working and sort of being opened up to basically hiring. So I'm combining two questions here. Being open to hire, 1,000 miles away. So is that going to impact, will it include, hopefully increase our diversity, inclusion, be able to get different people, different candidates. I can now apply for jobs all around the world technically. Is that a good thing in your thing, or what could be the side effects of that, I suppose?
I think with all these things, they're kind of it's double-edged swords, isn't it? I mean, you're opening up the whole market to the world in terms of skill sets out there, which has got to be a good thing for the world. But then local markets might suffer. So yeah, I think it's a lot of positives there. I just picking up on that point about continuous learning. I remember in the credit crunch, a lot of people who I know that got put out of work or made redundant, they went off and did extra study at that point. And I think that the whole concept of mid-career reskilling and just continuous improvement, that makes a lot of sense, especially in this rapidly changing environment. I think it's that makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
I think it's one of those interesting ones. My fear about opening it up to a wider pool, that we don't perpetuate the kind of inequalities that we already have in our culture. It's not a case of open up and just hire everybody else who looks and sounds and acts like you. The whole point of being more open is to actually really challenge that, and I think that's going to be the difficulty. So I think that for me is great. Hire the people that you wouldn't have been able to hire before because of logistics. Just don't hire somebody who's just going to fit in, and I think that's a good thing as long as we kind of use it in the right way. I see a nod here about burnout, and I think that's from Andy, who's my boss. So good to note he's on this. But the idea when I'm triple jobbing, no. So the idea is that I think this is what we again sort of said before, that it's just that dichotomy of you've got mass unemployment, people who don't have jobs and who are sitting there and lost to do. You have other people who are still in work and possibly triple jobbing, probably doing 80-hour weeks because their job has widely changed or it's just more difficult and whatever. So we have this kind of mass burnout and then mental health crisis for unemployment. Like, how do we balance that? Like, in Rachel's simple mind, that is, well, I'm clearly working 3 jobs. There's 2 more people that we could hire to take the load off me, and start doing that. Is that kind of about working smarter? Like, my vision of the future is no one, not even startups, really should be working the 80, 100-hour weeks anymore. We need to be working smarter. So what's the thoughts in and around that, sort of balancing the people who are triple jobbing at the minute and burnout?
I guess my instant reaction to that, and I know obviously my days have definitely got longer, but I think that's just due to demand and also the ability to be able to get up straight onto the computer at 6:30 in the morning and finish at 6:30 at night, so 7:30 at night. But where people are triple jobbing, that's about corporate responsibility. So ultimately they have furloughed or made redundant other people, put the pressure on one person, and it's all about the bottom line. So they aren't being either ethical or checking their moral compass on that front. So if they need that amount of work to be done, make sure you're looking after the well-being of your people, because if you're not, then they will burn out, and then you'll be in an even worse situation. And that's about corporate responsibility and well-being. And as leaders, we absolutely need to be standing by those morals. The mechanisms and the financial mechanisms have been there through furlough and everything else, but it doesn't mean to say we put the pressure on people in the same way. We've been using technology like workspace analytics built into our tech to be able to measure that. And we've also been monitoring it to see the behaviours and styles of individuals. We also sat down as leaders and said, look, I remember my worst day was 29 calls in one day. I started at 6:30. It was even my birthday, which makes it even worse. And I finished at 11:30 that night. And I had to check myself and think that I've got teams looking around me, looking at me as a role model to say, well, if he's doing it, I've got to do it. And it's like, no, that's got to stop, because then they're going to see and perceive, especially with that online presence experience. We need to absolutely hold and stand by that. Our people are our most important asset. Companies don't exist without people, right? So let's make sure we look after it.
Yeah, and I think it's not just the fact that furloughs happened and people end up with 3 jobs. I think it's also because of the current way of working. There are new jobs and new roles. So it's not that it's more the fact that your role expands. And it's like, actually, I'm now looking after people remotely. We're now putting this diversity and inclusion. We're now doing all these different things. And rather than doing it on top of your job, that should be a role. So, maybe this is us as corporates thinking responsibly and going, actually, we have the money, we're doing okay. We should open that up as a role. Exactly. We should get someone into the company and see. And I think that's sort of where we're heading. And I think that I went through a while what I would consider is abuse of Teams meetings or whatever other thing of where people just thought that the goal in life was to fill your day with meetings and Teams, and that's the recipe to burnout for sure, because I didn't realize how much time I used getting coffees and chatting to people as my downtime to think, and whatever else. And the back-to-back Teams calls is very different to having a full day of diary in real life, and how that changes people. So I think that's probably the next wave that we might find. It's already happening to doctors and nurses who are on the front line, but it might be a slower burn for office workers as well, and everything else. See a few other questions in. Outside burnout, mental health, how do we do that? We're missing the face-to-face relationships and sense of community. Do you guys have any good tips for that, or anything that you're trying to do in current climates to kind of get that face-to-face fix when you can't really, when it's not technically legal?
I'll let Gilbert go first on that one.
Yeah.
So tips. Well, basically, what we've seen is a big requirement, big rise in demand for like the likes of desk booking apps. So people can sort of book their desk in the office, and then it's quite with a row of 10 desks, you might pick every third one, and they'd be available, and you can book those desks when you go into the office. As an example of one thing that we've seen. The other thing is planning your trips in around other teammates or other strategic connections that you want to meet up with physically in the office. So those coordination tools, we're seeing definitely a rise in demand for those types of things. And then also obviously there's the indoor air quality monitoring that's rising in importance massively, and also cleaning routines. But like you say, while the government says that we shouldn't really be going into the office, and that's kind of that is what it is at the moment. But I think going forward, that'll definitely be more important and more prevalent in people's lives. So they'll think about why they're going into the office, and collaboration and communication, and who they're meeting when they go in there. Yeah,
I think it becomes the case of remote first, but what do you really need to see people for? So you make that cool thing. I know what
technology actually helped that, because I think technology hasn't really caught up in terms of being proactive around planning your trip into the office.
I kind of think so.
There have been some benefits though. I mean, I know it is difficult. We don't get that downtime of thinking. That's the big piece that I'm missing in my commuting time, or jump on a flight, or be able to read a book, or just think about and process stuff in pre or post a meeting. But one thing I have realized is that we've become so much closer as a team. I know more about my colleagues than I ever have done. Their cats and dogs' names, their wives, their kids. We get them in to include. I know. I mean, you even noticed the whiskey collection at the back, and I've had more conversations about men's hair than I've ever had in my entire life. But it's there are some positives to this, but there are also some massive negatives. I'm a hugely sociable person, run lots of workshops, and I miss doing those in a physical format. We have had some success in the odd meet and greet for coffee when we could, and in smaller, very much smaller groups. And I think we need to kind of maximize on that and keep using the tools and the ideas and the funny elements of it to kind of bring those communities together. And we've been trying everything we can possibly think of. Even tomorrow night, we've got a wine tasting between our leadership team, which is going to be quite good fun. I'm very much looking forward to that. But it can be something just as simple as pinging someone for 5 minutes, just for an ad hoc piece, coffee or whatever. But kind of water, to your point, waterside chat, water cooler chat.
Yeah, I think that's what we've done. We've kind of had open sessions that you can jump in, at a set time. So if it suits you, jump in and have a chat. My biggest thing is I love spontaneity, and scheduled fun is less fun when it's scheduled, and you can't take that away from it. Sometimes you'd be in the office and you would just be like, we're all stuck, let's go out and do something. Just I think that's it. But I'm with you. I started a new team, so I know my team probably better than my last team that I spent 2 years with, in a space of a few months. But do I really know them? Like, I know a lot about their decor and their choice of whatever it is and their family, but you just don't have that physical thing. And I think that for me going forward, it's about risk balancing. It's like what activities are worth that risk. And I think we just need to realize, well, that'll never replace it. It's just finding that really nice balance. My fear is if I spend too long, I'll just become a hermit, and I'm quite social, so I definitely don't want that to happen. I see maybe we'll take a final question or so and then sort of wrap up here, but I see Tom again came in with a good question of, like, how do you train, guide, motivate new grads and apprenticeships? This is a thing close to my heart because we have this right now at difficult, how do you do that? So I'm taking the first part of his question, like, how do you have an intern who's, a graduate who's never worked in an office before, and you fully onboard them remotely, and, it kind of sucks, to be fair, to be them, that they're not getting the full experience that they normally would. How do we sort of make that as good as possible? And going forward, because I need that tip as much as anyone else, I think, right now. Because we've just hired quite a few graduates and various people, and you just want to give them the best experience. Any thoughts, Matthew, Gilbert?
I really feel for people that have joined in this period, and what we've tried to do is over embellish in a way. So we've sent them a welcome package. They get that brand awareness, some nice little bits of swag, making sure that their technology works, their onboarding experience is as slick as possible. We invite them to coffee mornings so that we get them, all of the new people that joined at a similar time are going through the same experience, so that they can get to know each other and support each other in a buddy framework. We've given them an active buddy who's a mirror to their role, who's been in the organisation a while. There's catch-ups with leaders as well, so we make sure that the leadership teams, all the way up to our CEO, engage with the new people so they feel important, feel part of the organisation. I had a really interesting conversation with one of our customers actually the other day, and they were wearing a badge which was the emblem of their organisation, and they're all doing it now because they feel like they're losing their brand kind of alliance and that kind of stuff. And I really enjoyed that. I thought it was fantastic, and we've been trying to seed that in as well. But yeah, especially from an early in career perspective, someone who's never worked in an office, doesn't understand the intensity of the meetings, doesn't understand that kind of etiquette. From an organisation perspective, on our point, we've tried to dilute the kind of hierarchy. There's always hierarchy in every organisation. We're pretty flat, to be fair, so you can come and grab me or grab someone else who's quite senior in the organisation pretty quickly. And we invite them to use their new person card, essentially, to more and more, so that they feel free to be able to do that. But I'd be keen to understand any other benefits and needs that need to be met from someone joining the company in this scenario.
I think the thing that I realised, that when you're in an office and you have new people, pulling someone aside, they want to have a quiet word about not knowing how to work the printer, which is frequently, or whatever it may be, right? They can ask someone, whereas asking, everyone's going to potentially be your superior for a meeting. It seems like a big deal. You know, it's like asking people for a Teams meeting or a chat, you know, and then sometimes async. So I think just getting that balance right, so it becomes regular check-ins. But that's the thing that I think is really like a massive struggle, sort of, in trying to get that balance right. So, and probably the final question, I think, is a good one, the last one from Christopher here, that if we're permanently shifting towards remote first, what changes in management style and good practices are needed? And I've been thinking about this a lot. There's a lot of companies I follow that are completely remote. So I don't know if you know Envision, you know, the software, the design software is completely remote, and they have a 1 day a year on site where they all meet up from all around the world. So I'm looking at the big companies that have never had a physical presence. You know, how are they doing it? And obviously they're successful. So that's trying to learn from that kind of experience. So I've started to follow a lot of remote first companies to see what they did. But any thoughts on how we have to change as leaders, basically, and managers as well as that? You know, is it looking at the companies that have successfully done that and sort of taking tips from them first? Yeah.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think that there's well, I can just speak from my experience, but what I see is a lot of internal meetings, and it's just kind of back-to-back internal meetings, and potentially, I think, I mean, there's some really good input in the chat here about, you know, potentially having like a 5-minute chit chat at the start of a stand-up, for example, which is really good. The other thing is, you know, if you've got a whole day full of internal meetings, there's no real reason why you have to fill up the whole slot. You know, if you could just say, you know, we've achieved what we want out of this meeting half an hour early, then that gives people another half hour to get on with their day, which doesn't always seem to happen. So yeah, and definitely the new starters, I feel like that's a real challenge for them, just understanding how things are done in the organization and who to go to for different pieces of information. That piece is, we've definitely got a lot to learn about that. But it's, yeah, definitely needs a lot of work. But
yeah, so I think that to conclude, it's like we're scratching the surface, we're figuring this out together. I'm largely consuming as much content and asking you questions as much out of my own personal interest to try and make me better at my job and sort of make the experience better. So I think it's like one of those things that I kind of feel like I want a personal tip of the day. You know, if you ever figure out these answers, you know, send me your tips. And I'm reading all the tips. So we'll summarize this and obviously put it back out afterwards. But I know the chat's been brilliant. So if anybody wants to bounce on over to continue the conversation on Whereby there, and we've started to use this for additional outside conversations. So it's a good bit of tech. Come on over and join us. But I just want to say thank you very much for the time. I've enjoyed the input. I've learned a good few tips and tricks there as well. But I kind of want to say that it seems scary now and it's difficult, but I think that the sort of being creative and innovative, this might push us all to just be better. And my hope is that the world of work will actually be better in the long term for this, for us trying to figure out how to be remote first, how to repurpose skills, how to, you know, consider that education is not just a commercial model for universities to make a lot of money and various things like that. You know, that's my take on it, but you can all take your own points away from it. But I just want to say thank you very much for your time, and thanks for joining us. So hopefully see some of you over in continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
thank you.
Thank you.